Hello, and welcome to the Grow Patiently podcast, the healthcare success podcast where we speak to people in the healthcare industry to learn all about their stories, the ups and downs of their illustrious careers, and hopefully get some great learnings that we can take away to our own work. Now, I'm here today with Ian, but before I introduce him, I'm going to talk about a new tax or a new fee that we have for the podcast, which is that if you do take even just one good thing from it, let's say you enjoy it, or you laugh, or you cry, or you take something that you learn, please do help us get the word out there. So the tax is that you like, subscribe, or share it with one person. Now that's done. Ian, hello, welcome.
Hey Hugo, thanks for having me. Excited for our chat today.
Yeah, likewise for certain. Now you're based in Seattle. So before we dive into it, I'd like to ask this question. I've never been to Seattle. So let's say I come over there in a couple of weeks' time. What have I got to do? What have I got to see? What have I got to eat to experience
Oh.
Seattle?
Well, I'll start by saying that for those of us that are born and raised in the region, we like to joke that we don't tell people how great it is on purpose. So, I'm supposed to tell you it's terrible. Don't come here. You'll hate it. Avoid it. But in actuality, it's amazing, which is why we tell people that it's not great so that they don't come here and ruin it. Uh, no, I kid. But honestly, in Seattle, I'm a big fan. I'm born and raised in the area, so Pacific Northwest here in the U.S. has been my kind of stomping grounds. And I'd say for folks who have never been to Seattle, there's of course the typical stuff, Pike Place Market, all the sort of standard things, but sort of touristy. What I always recommend for those that are trying to get like the real Seattle experience, there's lots of different neighborhoods in Seattle, and each one has a different vibe. And so, depending on kind of what you're into, testing out some of the other neighborhoods are super fun. And because we have a bunch of lakes, basically smack in the middle of the city and or around the city, when you find a neighborhood you like and you live there, you don't leave the neighborhood that much. So I live in a northern part of Seattle in the city, and what I would always point people towards, one of my favorite neighborhoods is called Ballard. And it's got this cool vibe to it. It's an old kind of fisherman, blue collar part of Seattle, and so lots of great restaurants. There's a cool music venue called the Tractor Tavern there. They book great shows. So I would say usually eat some great food because we have actually a thriving food scene here, and then go see some live music. We've got tons of great venues around here, and Seattle is the birthplace of a lot of different really famous, musicians, right? A lot of people, everyone from Jimi Hendrix to, I mean, Kurt Cobain's not from Seattle, he's from the Pacific Northwest. But I think depending who you talk to, they might claim it. There's a lot of great artists that have come through here. So that'd be my top couple picks. And then, if you're a sports guy, we've got some pretty great, stadiums and a sports scene with the Seahawks, Mariners, Sounders. So you can kind of do a full day and really hit all the activities. So maybe we'll have to have you out to you, then I'll show you a good time.
Yeah, I would love that. Oh, well, thank you. I didn't know Jimi Hendrix was from Seattle.
Yeah. I think there's one of the neighborhoods called Capitol Hill here, and there's an old bronze statue there that's been there a long time of Hendrix, and yeah, it's one of those kind of cool things. I'm pretty sure, at least, hopefully, I'm not wrong on
Yeah,
that. I'm pretty sure he's from here.
I don't have a fact
Watch me be
checker,
wrong.
so
Yeah. Do a quick search here.
yeah. Well, do you know what? In London, we have a couple of things for Jimi Hendrix because we have a house that he stayed in that happened to also be a guy called
Ah,
Handel's house, which was a composer from like I think the 16 or 1700s. So you can go and have a look
yeah.
around in like the bedroom that he was in. And also there was the Last Hotel. Bless him, he was so young. He was
Oh,
only 27 when he passed away. It's pretty
yeah. Isn't
shocking.
that crazy? Yeah. Well, and 27's that what is it? Is it 27 or 29?
Correct.
Right. That a lot of
Yeah,
the
with
major
Kurt Cobain
famous
actually as
artists.
well.
Yeah, exactly. There's like that's supposed to be like the scary number that all the greats have succumbed to at that age.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, do you know what? I
yeah,
haven't fact checked that either, so I don't know for definite it is 27, but I feel like he was certainly really young.
right.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
Seattle is the
exactly.
place I got to go to. Okay, so
Definitely.
let's dive into it. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about let's dive straight into the company that you're currently working for, Joya, you
Sure.
can see in your
Yeah.
background. Let's talk about what they do and what you do for them, and then let's talk about kind of how you found your way to it.
Yeah, definitely. So the company I work for now, I've been here for about a year full time. We're essentially a seed stage venture capital backed company called JOYA Health, or JOYA for short. And the company basically, our core product offering is an employee benefit focused on skin health. And really, our mission is structured around two key pillars. The first is access, and the second is affordability. So today, especially in the U.S., if you are looking to get any kind of, medical care or really any skin care, it's very fragmented, right? And we have only a few thousand dermatologists in all of the US. And so our founder and CEO, Mike Jafar, who was in the medical aesthetics industry for 20 years, major brands, Evolus, all these other, well-known brands. In that time, he noticed, this really interesting problem space, which is there's great providers, dermatologists, medical spas, some plastic surgeons as well. We'll focus more on skin. But he noticed that it was very fragmented. There wasn't a centralized or kind of unified provider network focused on skin health. And so over the last few years, Joy has been building this network. We're now at a few hundred providers strong, again, ranging from dermatologists to medical spas to plastic surgeons. And the idea with this centralized provider network is that we essentially match consumers through an employee benefit that Joya offers to a provider. And typically it's for a year, on a contract. And when we match these consumers to providers, what that looks like basically is for the year of their contract, their term, when they sign up for Joya, they usually pay a small amount. It's a voluntary employee benefit. So in other words, the employer will contract with Joya, then the employer offers the benefits to their employees. And then employees can choose voluntarily, in most cases, to sign up. And I say most cases because we do have a subsidized model. So there are a few employers we work with that just pay for it in full, which of course we offer a lower price for it since it's a guarantee of your employee base. But for most of our employers, it's voluntary. So people can choose to sign up. So in the US, we have the typical open enrollment windows around now in the fall. So you would sign up for your health care that would start on January 1st for the following year. And along with that, most employers will offer a whole suite of other benefits. The typical ones in the US are going to be, medical, vision, and dental. On top of that, really great employers will choose to offer additional things, everything from, accident coverage to pet insurance to, some folks provide, fertility. It just really depends on the employer and kind of what they care about and what their employee base really benefits from. So Joya is one of those voluntary benefits, right? And so once an employee signs up and starts using Joya, they get matched to a provider, we give them about $1,000 worth of actual usable benefits through the course of that year. And so what that actually looks like today is you pay a small monthly fee and you get access to the benefit and the network. And then as part of that, you get $125 of credits per quarter to use towards your treatments. So that can be everything from facials to peels to Botox injections to filler to microdermabrasion, really any of the minimally invasive, skin focused treatments that a lot of these employees are already, paying for out of their own pocket. And so as part of that credit, they can put the $125 towards the treatments. They also get a free annual facial or peel. They get a free annual medical grade sunscreen. They're going to get a skin cancer screen. They're also going to get access 24/7 to teledermatology, with your first appointment covered by Joya, and then 20% off any subsequent appointments. We also offer discounts through our providers on medical grade products. So that's, ranging between like 15 to 30% off. And this is things like, medicated, salves and, lotions and creams and topical treatments, things like that. And then ultimately, we are continually testing kind of new offerings that we can package as part of this. So that's really what we do kind of with, the high level as well as some detail. But ultimately, it's been an interesting experience being in the employee benefit space because we obviously are built on top of a technology platform. So we use technology to administer the benefit, to handle the matching, manage our operations. So it's this interesting blend of kind of more technical product work, which is what my career the last, almost 14, 15 years has been based around, but also this new space that I've never been in, which is employee benefits. It's a very different beast. So yeah, it's a little bit about what we do. And I guess to close out, I mentioned, we do this skin cancer screen. So we found an interesting model where we kind of mix the medical with the aesthetic. So in order to get access to those benefits after you've signed up, we gate it against a annual skin cancer screen. And in the US, it's roughly around, at least based on our data and the research we've run, there's roughly about 80% of adults who have not had a skin cancer screen in at least 3 years. And then if you basically pare that down further, almost half of US adults have never had a skin cancer screen. Why that matters is if you look at melanoma, it's basically a numbers game. So for every few hundred people you check, you will catch somebody who has melanoma at some stage. And what's interesting about melanoma in particular, as skin cancer, if you catch it early enough, it has like a 90% plus success rate of being treated. If you catch it too late, it can kill you, right? So there's one of those kind of not a lot in between. And so we use that as a way to basically incentivize folks to get that kind of check to make sure they're healthy. And then as part of that, we make the access available to the benefits then. So it's been an interesting kind of build out on this product offering within the benefits space, but backed by technology. So we have this really cool intersection of a lot of different problem types. So anyway, that's in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing it. I think that's a pretty clear explanation. And I know that from what we spoke about earlier, that you're involved in lots of areas of it because of the size of the
Oh yeah.
team. You just like any
Yeah.
startup company, you've got your hands in all of it, really. So I was going to ask you, how have you been enjoying being a part of growing this business that's in a totally different space? It's about sort of connecting with other businesses, really, and it's in a B2B space,
Yeah.
and that's quite interesting for healthcare, really. I think because actually there's quite a lot of people who typically are B2C who've been
Yeah.
thinking about bringing in an arm of B2B, and so it'd be really interesting to hear more about your experience.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a new set of challenges, right? And I'll come back to that here in a minute. I think it's worth noting, so my official title here at Joya is VP of Product, right? I've been in product development, mostly technical products for, like I said, about 14, 15 years. Got my start in big tech, been in startups for the last several years. And I've worked, I worked my first half of my career, I was in big tech. So I was at Apple for a few years and Amazon for 5. So I really got that experience of kind of the big tech, you're cog in the machine, you're really grinding. Those 60 to 80-hour work weeks were real, especially at least while I was at Amazon. That was like peak. I was there 2014 to 2019. And right before I had started, actually, there was this article that had been published that talked about like people crying at their desks and how miserable they were. And there was some truth to it. That was maybe a little inflated, but so I kind of did the big tech thing, and that's where I got my start. Really enjoyed it. But what I found was, big tech is cool, and there's these really big, meaty, hairy problems to solve at scale, which is super interesting. But at a certain point, you're just really owning a piece of a piece of a piece of a piece of the pie, right? And so what I love about startups, which I've now been in, and I've now been in, venture capital backed through Series B, so to kind of small to mid size. The prior company I was at was private equity backed, around 500, employees, restaurant technology. So I've kind of done all of the different growth stages, the different funding types, even the different business models. I've worked on marketplaces, apps, websites. I've been in B2B, B2C. So I've kind of done the gambit, right? And when I tie all that together, part of why I landed at Joya is kind of twofold. I think threefold, I would say. First and foremost was the mission, right? This idea of bringing access and affordability to skin health to the American populace, at least for now. That was really interesting to me, right? Especially at this angle of, hey, we can also, actually materially impact the diagnosis rates for skin cancer, melanoma, through this model. So I really liked that amalgamation of kind of medical with aesthetic and then the access piece. So that was number one. But number two, I was really keen to come here because of the early growth stage. As a seed stage company, we're roughly 15 employees. So to your point, Hugo, I wear a lot of hats. I do, like yesterday, I'm writing job descriptions for one of the roles we need to hire post raise, which we're right in the middle of closing our funding round for the next stage, right? And then, last week I'm, doing a multi-page deep dive, product research report and a pitch to an executive team at, another startup, right? So it's cool because you get a chance to really do a lot of different things. But I think the idea of coming to a smaller company wasn't just about building out the product and really scaling out from product market fit on, but for me, it was really also about building a company, right? So building a culture, building, practices. How do we build a foundation grounded in, real principles or values that we can all share and agree on? And so I think that was the other big drive for me was, hey, I want this chance to build not just the product and the space, but also the team, the culture, the company, right? So I think for me, it's been this interesting transition of shifting a lot of the stuff I've learned previously, but having to adjust to meet the moment, right? When you're 15 people, there isn't such specialty in things, right? Everybody's a bit of a generalist, everybody's wearing 3, 4 hats. So it's been a really fun challenge, I'd say. I realized, Hugo, I'm not sure if that answers the question fully. I feel like I'm missing a piece of where you were wanted to go with that.
Well, it was still enjoyable though, that's for certain. No,
Yeah.
you were explaining kind of why you enjoy it and how you came into it. I think the question I was asking was the experience of the B2B side,
Ah,
and
ah.
what that's been like.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for tying me back there on that.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
So part of why, yeah, sorry, it's been a busy few weeks. Like I said, we're T minus a couple of weeks out from closing our funding round, so it's been long hours and a lot of brain power. So forgive my my meandering brain today. Yeah. So it's interesting. I give you all that background, right? Because as I mentioned, I've been on these different models, and again, what I think is really the unique approach here at JOYA was uncovering this business model of the employee benefit. So in many ways, it's B2B to C, right? So like I said, we contract between JOYA and the employer, and then the employer offers it as a benefit. So then the employee signs up. So it's this interesting cycle where the persona we're selling to is typically, like heads of HR, chief people officers, like, senior leaders in like the HR kind of function, if you will. But then the actual users of the product are end users, right? And sure, some of the folks who, of course, are administering the benefit for their company choose to use the benefit as well. But
Mm.
it's a different persona, right? You're serving, the employee base, and so the solutions we build, the actual benefits we offer as part of our package, the features and the capabilities we build into our platform, all of that stuff's really grounded on how do we create a better experience for the consumer, the employee, right? And then conversely, it's essentially a marketplace dynamic because we also have providers, which are our other end users, right? So it's pretty cool too. We found a model where, with this $125 credit, we actually don't charge any of our providers to join our network. It's completely free, right? And most of these networks will have like a entrant fee or registration fee, that they'll charge and monetize based on leads. So there's all these different models. They usually have money attached to it. For us, we don't actually charge them anything. We just ask that they provide that 125 credit. So if you think about it, $125 a quarter basically becomes your cost of customer acquisition, right? But when you actually look at the data, most of these appointments that occur on a quarterly basis, the average is somewhere between $400 to $600 paid per visit. So in other words, you're paying $125 visit and you're turning around a $400 to $600 visit. We've also seen that by the third and fourth appointment, the visit average jumps to about $1,000 a visit. So it's a really great sort of trade-off, if you will, to say we're making a concession as a provider to be able to bring people over. And then as part of that, that's your quote unquote, what it costs, right, to be able to join the network. And so when you look at these marketplace dynamics, the B2B piece is really interesting, but also frustrating. And the reason why is because it's a benefit. And so the way benefits are administered in the US have two peak cycles. The first of which is January 1st starts. So right now, most folks in the US are going through what's called open enrollment. So this is that time where you're picking your benefits for the next year. There's another push again and a start of 6/1. And then there are some employers that do kind of rolling enrollments, right? So those are the three buckets, but the bulk of employers in the US start all their benefits on 1/1. So one of the challenges with this model was really learning that the sales cycle are about 4 to 6 months, right? And so we've been selling since about June the product to all these employers signing contracts, but we won't realize the revenue until the benefits start on 1/1, right? So I could contract for 1,000 people for an employer today, but I won't realize even a fraction of that until the 1/1 start, right? And I will say we are doing well in that realm. And so when you look at generally across these businesses, these voluntary benefits, they're going to range, in terms of what the enrollment percentage is. So as a baseline, like pet insurance hovers around 2% if an employer offers it enrollment, right? And then if you look at other types of voluntary benefits like I don't know, call it like accident coverage or, supplemental life or one of those, they tend to have an average about 6 to 8% enrollment. While JOYA, we sit at around a 12% enrollment today. So in other words, it is a benefit people really like. We're getting a pretty good chunk of folks that sign up. But even with a 12% enrollment, I won't see any of that until 1/1. So with 1,000 employees, or even 100 employees, if I'm going to get 12 of them, and those 12 are going to pay me dollars, and those dollars are needed for our company, I'm going to have to wait a few months to see those dollars, right? So that's just an example of the challenge, though, that the B2B angle has brought. Conversely, though, to your point, it changes the dynamic because I'm selling to a single entity, the employer, and then they essentially are distributing it to a whole slew of people, their employees. So that's where the B2B2C angle comes in. Pros and cons, I will say. Benefits is not the easiest space I've been in. I haven't had to learn a lot in this last year, but I do think that the approach is unique, and we're the first and only one of its kind. There is nothing else like JOYA, at least focused on skin health, that's out there today.
That always makes such a big difference. When you're first or in the first few bunches, it makes the sell pretty interesting, especially as the sort of stack that you've mentioned is quite feels like a win-win for a lot of people. If I'm a provider,
Mm-hmm.
why would I not do that? Okay, it's free for me to join.
Right.
I just have to give a bit of my time, I guess. And then
Mm-hmm.
if people are interested, if I'm a business and you can come and tell me, okay, look, 12% of people are taking it up, which is I don't know what that was, 6 times more than the pet insurance. I can't remember the number you gave. That's pretty
Mm-hmm.
huge, so it's quite an easy, well, not to take anything away, but it sounds like an easy sell.
It once people I think realize the value, right? I think the other thing that's tricky about is selling it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's difficult. When I've worked on software apps, websites. I've worked on all these other kind of types of product offerings, and it's distribution and all of that is very different. Marketplaces, you're heavily reliant on organic search traffic, right? Apps, you're heavily reliant on other forms of distribution, or in the case of restaurant technology, which is what I worked on the last few years prior to JOYA, you similar boat where you were selling to like a corporate entity, but then ultimately the end users were people running the restaurant, right? So there's a lot of overlaps, but at the same time, I will say it has not been the easiest to adjust to because of the lengthy cycles. And then really the benefits world as a whole is just, it's its own beast. There's also a new persona I've never worked with, which is called a broker. Are you familiar with this concept? I don't know if you've heard this before.
I mean, I understand a broker like an insurance broker and
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
So same boat, when we talk about brokers from the lens of benefits, there's benefit brokers, and we have several that we directly partnered with, and they're wonderful. We love our broker partners. They're, game changers. But it was one of the learnings we had along the way, right? It's difficult to scale going to individual employers over time. How do you get access? Who do you talk to? There's only so many people on the sales team, right? But brokers are this interesting umbrella entity, if you will, where underneath a broker sits a slew of employers, and so the broker represents the employers, and the brokers who goes and negotiates the benefits package and gets you the best rates and helps you compile what offering you're going to give your employees, right? So once we learned that was a huge win for us in terms of distribution, because once you get the brokers on board, you get vetted by them, they list you, they offer you to their portfolios. All of a sudden they're essentially selling the benefit for you.
Mm.
Right. So the broker thing, like that was a huge shift. And I've never worked, or had to solve problems for that persona before. End users, yes. Corporate functions, yes. Businesses, yes. All these different persona types, right? And I'm talking in product development language, but broker's its own beast. It's not really an employer. It's not really a consumer. They're kind of a middle person, if you will,
Mm.
between JOYA and then the employer, and then of course then the employee. And that's also where it's almost like it's like B2B to B2C. There we go. Yeah, I think I got that right.
Lots of different people to consider. Yeah. The
Yeah.
brokers do sound like a good game. I mean, once they're involved in it, then that's
Yeah.
it's like any kind of partnership, really.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you, because
Mm-hmm.
you have quite a unique value proposition, shall we say, like the
Mm-hmm.
USPs and all these kind of things. And I think a lot of people, sometimes in healthcare, especially in like local healthcare practices and things like that, they struggle to either kind of come up with or understand what their value proposition should be. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other challenge I think they have is sort of really clearly explaining what that is. Now you just dive straight into it the first 5 minutes of the call. and were like and was like, this is exactly what we do and why we do it and how we're different. I wonder if there's anything that you experienced when you joined this company that maybe you were a part of, or maybe they explained to you, I'm not sure exactly what stage you came in,
Mhm.
that helped formulate that either in your mind or as a company.
Mm. Yeah, so I joined shortly before we came out of stealth. So there was a couple of years of build prior to me joining full time. Just building out foundational system, architecture, basic flows, processes, things like that. Really early kind of beta testing the benefit with a handful of friendly employers, just seeing if it works, right? So I came in kind of the tail end of that, but before we officially, excuse me, launched. And so it was an interesting time where the general concept was there. We had the core product offering, right? It's an employee benefit. Here's what we offer as part of that package. But in the year's time, we've really built that out. So, we launched in a year, we launched a teledermatology offering so we could help address some of the access challenge. I mentioned before it's marketplace dynamic. So we have high demand right now from employees, but I have to keep pace with the providers, and mainly because providers have to physically be available to see a patient.
Mhm.
So one of our ongoing challenges is how do we grow the provider network at a fast enough clip to meet the demand from the employee base? And the reality is if we don't have a provider close enough to an employee, then it's of no value, right? They can't really use the benefit. And so we have several processes and kind of steps in the sales cycle where we verify zip codes, we check on coverage, we make sure that there's going to be providers available for your employee base. So in other words, there was a good foundation, I would say, and then in this last year, what we've really built out is the robustness of the offering. Adding teledermatology. We've been experimenting. We're working with another group where we've piloted an AI-based hardware and software solution for being able to identify skin issues, which has like an 85 to 90% accuracy. So imagine a world where you're going to your appointment and you've got a provider who can take an image scan with a dermatoscope, upload it to a bespoke AI model with 85 to 90% accuracy, get an assessment back and give you an idea of what it is, right? So we're really pushing the envelope and trying to innovate on behalf of both our consumers and our providers, right? If you think about this AI pilot that I just mentioned, there's a benefit on both sides. For the consumer, they have a more accurate assessment. They now have a better sense of what's going on with their body. For a provider, it helps accelerate the appointments and it builds confidence in them providing an assessment and thus which treatment protocols they decide to administer based on what has been assessed, right? So I'd say that the foundation helped because we understood where we could operate, what was the core problem set we're solving, which is again centered on access and affordability. Where we've spent this last year is really building out the total offering and really understanding the dynamics of the problem set we're solving, right? And I think that the example with the broker, learning that ultimately we have this marketplace dynamic, and you have to solve the marketplace problem first before distribution is solvable, right? If I don't have enough providers to have employers come, that means I'm not going to have enough employers to sign up, right? And so then who cares about distribution, right? I could be out there and everybody knew about JOYA. And if I don't have enough doctors, then who cares, right? So I think this last year was the refinement and really proving out product market fit and putting in place the foundation for scale. So I would say to kind of fully close the loop on your question there, when I started, we had a clear understanding of kind of what we were, what's the core value prop, and what our general mission was. But I think now we've really refined that and we've understood how it works in practice. So what does it actually mean when we say we're driving access and affordability? What levers do we pull to drive those things? How are we actually impacting, positive health outcomes for our consumers, right? So those are all things we've refined. But yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's messy coming into a small company and, having to learn the ropes and, having to pick up where somebody else left off on something and having to really shape the narrative too, because it's a different narrative you have to tell to go get funding in a pre-seed stage versus the narrative you have to be able to tell and start to prove with data at a seed stage. And then series A and on, that's where it gets really rigorous. And you actually have to hit, real metrics. You have to show certain growth numbers. So the evolution of the narrative, I think, follows closely the growth and the story arc, or the evolution of the company. And yeah, I think it's been about a solid year of us really figuring out how to deliver that in such a way.
It sounds exciting. I mean, that must be exciting to be a part of. I think one of the things that seems really clear from what you've said is that you all as a team think very methodically about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it and for who. And that seems to be woven in pretty much everything you're saying. And you actually mentioned it right at the beginning that you're enjoying being part of building the culture. And also,
Yeah.
just now, you said telling the
Mm-hmm.
story. All these things are closely aligned. And it's interesting to sort of hear that thread through. So I wonder if you could share maybe a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more about how you're involved in shaping the culture, the bit that you're enjoying. What are you doing
Yeah.
actively to keep everyone on mission? Because also you said it earlier, you were the one who was sold on the mission initially. That's what brought you in. So you were obviously excited by it. How do you nurture that within the team and then within all the other stakeholders?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times the word culture is often used as kind of a buzzword or as this blanket term to describe some nebulous executive's brain ideas, right? It's just like, this is quote unquote culture, right? Or we're doing a team building event, that's culture. I actually think that's completely misguided and wrong, just bluntly, right? When somebody asks me like, well, when you talk about building culture, what does that mean? What I think that means is culture is really comprised of a few different things. And I think, if I was to create two buckets for the two types of things that feed culture, I would say there's the implicit bucket and the explicit bucket, right? The explicit bucket is the basic stuff that I think a lot of people can get to. And I think a lot of folks see modeled to them by other leaders or managers or bosses or what have you. And I think the explicit stuff is, for example, it's norms, right? Like if you want to take time off, an expectation is putting it on the calendar, right? Other examples of very explicit culture building functions is running an all hands meeting, and we do that bi-weekly. It's something that I've brought to the team here, and we're 15 people, right? There's zero reason why we shouldn't have at least 30 minutes a week where we connect as a team, all 15 of us, right? So we've been actually testing an interesting model at JOYA where we do an alternating pattern. So we get guaranteed 30 minutes a week as a complete company, 15 of us ish, give or take. 1 week on, so this week is all hands. And in the all hands, we use that as an opportunity for really keeping the team aligned and keeping the team informed, right? So right now, as I mentioned, we're in the last couple of weeks of closing our funding round. So the last several all hands have been heavily focused on how's funding progressing, right? And we bias towards transparency, right? And I'll get to that. That's more on the implicit side, but we really share, this is how many pitches we had this week. Here's how many converted to the data room. Of those in the data room, here's how many are interested in the term sheets. Now that we're reviewing term sheets, here's who's on the term sheets, right? So we really use the all hands as kind of that big picture. Here's what we're up to. Here's how we're progressing. We also will cover key goals. Like a big one for us is provider network growth. How are we pacing? How's the team doing? Really big picture stuff. And then on the off week, so next week we do company-wide demos, and that's another thing that I've brought here to test. And I've done that at many companies, various formats. But what I love about the demo format and what's working great here at JOYA is a lot of times these demos are restricted to engineers or product design and engineering because they're the ones building the features, the things you're touching, feeling on the platform. But we're actually using it across the company. So I open the door 30 minutes every other week and we say, who has something that he can demo? And we've seen everything from, hey, I've designed this completely new process flow, with tickets and a new system for categorizing issues. And that's an operations person who gives that demo. Maybe the next week it's, hey, I've been building this financial model to forecast the success of our product. This is iteration 3, and I walk everybody through the financial model. So what it creates is this community feel, right, where you can celebrate each other's work, you get visibility into what's happening across the company, and it's great because it guarantees upward visibility. When we're wearing 5 hats each, that also means the executive team, myself and 3 others who comprise the exec group, we're also doing 50 million things. And, we trust our team members and our direct reports to be able to execute. So I'm not necessarily in the weeds on everything, and I may not see all their work, and that's fine. I'll come back to this, but I believe in an empowered team model. So I work through that lens very heavily. And so that guarantees me a chance where even if I didn't see the work this person did for that week, I have a chance to get it, in front of everybody, ask questions, see how it can help. And it spurs a lot of great conversation. It spurs opportunities for making things better, because all of a sudden you have somebody go, oh, that's a cool workflow. I bet I could use that too, and just like tweak it here. And all of a sudden I'll be faster. So that's the explicit bucket, right? And I think a lot of folks put a lot of attention on those, and rightfully so. They're important, and I don't want to understate the value of them. But I actually think the other bucket is much more critical, and that's the implicit bucket, right? Implicit culture building really gets into principles, values, and philosophy, right? So this gets into, how do we ground our interactions, right? What is expected of us when we communicate with each other? How do we show up in difficult situations? What do we prioritize? What do we bias towards, right? So if you ask me what are some of my values as a person, but also as a leader that I believe in, and that I've in either past roles or in my current role have implemented or are implementing, it's grounded on a few key things. I think one is trust and transparency, right? And I put those two together very intentionally because I think transparency can build trust, right? I also think we're all grown-ups and we should be treated as such. And I think for too long, corporate culture has put a lot of folks in a position of parent-child relationship, where I'm the boss, you're the kid, right? Or I'm the boss, you're the employee, right? And I think that removes a lot of people's ability to show up as their best selves, right? How can you authentically operate yourself, learn the ways you learn best, communicate the ways you communicate best, if you are put into a box of here's how you're supposed to act, talk, sound, etc., right? So I think trust and transparency go hand in hand. Trust also means being outcome focused, right? So what that means is I do not care how people on my teams get to an end result, right? So long as it's not nefarious, right? But I really don't care, because at the end of the day, every single person's brain is different. How you perceive the world, how you intake information, how you process problems, how you solve problems, all that's going to be a bit different than me. And sure, we'll have a Venn diagram. I'm sure there's things that are similar between you and I, Hugo, but there's also probably plenty of things that are different. So when we obsess over outcomes, right, where do we want to get to, right? What's the core problem we are trying to solve here? What changes is this dynamic of empowerment, right? Because if I say, look, I'm just telling you, we're going to line up front and we're going to discuss it too. It's very rare I prescribe things, right? Now, there's certain things like I know we have to hit a certain volume of providers to be able to have the number of employer contracts that we need to be able to hit our revenue target. So that those are set things, right? But otherwise, even outcomes are generally somewhat flexible. But the key is having a discussion as a team, getting that alignment up front on where are we trying to end up. And then as a leader, actually stepping back and saying, look, I'm here to support you. I'm going to provide coaching. I'll give you feedback. I'll help steer you when you take a weird turn. But at the end of the day, I'm going to give you space. I'm going to trust you then to take the right steps to execute to get to that outcome. And I'm going to help steer you along the way to make sure we arrive at the outcome. But at the end of the day, I'm going to give you that room to do it yourself. And this is where we're starting to get into what we call like the empowered team model, right? How do you really empower your teams, your employees, the people that you work with to actually own the results they drive? Well, it's by giving them the outcome up front, trusting them, giving them room, and then being transparent along the way with each other about what's working, what's not, right? And so there's more to it. You can add layers to this, but I think that's a big piece that I would say is part of implicit culture building, right? And then lastly, I'll end with the interactions is another key piece, right? So how do you interact with each other? How do you talk? So one of the things that one of my prior companies, somebody had introduced me to, and now I brought it everywhere. We call it the operating manual. So if you've ever put together like an IKEA piece of furniture or something, right? It comes with the instructions and you got to put all the pieces together. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I built this dresser. Well, people are not all that different. Turns out if you give people a manual to how to best interact with you, they interact better with you, right? Novel concept. So I write this, I have this operating manual that I keep with me. I brought it now to several companies and several places. And, in some cases I've mandated the teams to do it. In other cases, I don't mandate, I just share mine. Hey, I'm your new manager. Hey, I'm Ian, joining the team. here's a little bit about me and here's my operating manual. And it's basically a running Google Doc, and I answer some core questions, things like, what are some interesting things to know about me? How do I like to give feedback? How do I like to receive feedback? What are some quirks about me? What are some values that I hold, or, what are expectations I have around, of others around me? So I think those are all various ways to build implicit culture, which is grounded in some shared set of principles or values, right? And then you can take it further by codifying it and all this stuff. You've got some corporate examples out there that started like this, like Amazon has the 14 or 15 leadership principles. But similar concept, obviously they're different scale, and that was 20 plus years ago when that was defined. But the idea still stands, which is if you focus on shared values or principles, it makes everything else within the business and the culture follow suit. And the key is alignment on the outcomes and the culture you want, and then giving space to get there however people get there best.
Yeah. Wow, how intriguing. I mean, I'm a big fan of setting where we're trying to go and then the end result. And then you can do it. You can do it however you want and also whenever you
Mm-hmm.
want. I mean, if you're
Mm-hmm.
blessed to be
Exactly.
able to work online, then if you
Mm-hmm.
want to do it at 1 a.m. in the morning, then be my guest. If that
That's right. Do you, boo boo? Yep.
Yeah, exactly. The I really like that idea of the operating manual. It's an interesting thing though, because it's one of those things, if you do it too hard, then it becomes, like you say, mandated, and then it kind of becomes almost a
Right.
bit contrived and just like anything.
Right.
So how do you go about finding people who can be really closely aligned with what you're doing and this implicit and explicit culture that you're building? Because you already mentioned that you're currently
Mm-hmm.
hiring or you're doing a job description.
Oh yeah.
What are you looking for in that person when they come for the interview?
Yeah. So, I mean, I should start by saying I have a interesting background. So I think I'm at career number of interviews. I think I'm somewhere in the ballpark of almost 300 interviews now. Part of why I've racked up so many interviews was my 5 years at Amazon. I was something called a bar raiser there, which meant I basically went through this. It was about a year long program where you had to get a certain number of interview hours. You had to do a certain amount of shadowing, but essentially they trained you how to be like an expert interviewer. And the model at Amazon, they have this bar raiser, and the idea is their whole job is to hold the hiring process accountable to that set of leadership principles. So you could call that culture fit, whatever you want to call it, but it's codified, right? You're not just making it up. You're actually measuring in the interview process how well a person shows up against those defined principles. And what's an interesting approach that Amazon has taken there is these bar raisers intentionally don't interview on the teams they're involved with. So during my time at Amazon, I think I hit about 180 interviews over about it would have been about 4 years of doing that. So, or so. Um, and in that time, most of the interviews I was doing all over the company. So I think one of the most interesting ones I did, I interviewed somebody for a ASL interpreter job for Amazon. Right? Like I knew nothing about, I don't speak ASL, American Sign Language. I don't really know anything about it. But my job as the bar raiser interview was not to know about the specific role. It was to measure the person's, experience, abilities, essentially their value set against Amazon's and how well they met that or didn't, right? And so this idea of bar raising, while yes, it's now become this corporate, kind of machine thing, the general concept, though, is really what stuck with me, right? And so to answer your question, a lot of how I vet folks, especially a smaller company right now, is against those principles and values. Now, of course, the prereqs are still there. Like you still have to have experience. You have to be able to, answer some behavioral questions, walk me through the results you've delivered, how you work, those kinds of things. But what I'm also really looking for is alignment with those values, right? Or misalignment, right? So when I talk about high ownership, trust, and transparency, and being outcome focused, what I'm going to look for is somebody who I can trust to operate in that same way. So one of the easy ways is when people frame their anecdotes, are they framing it through an outcome or an output, right? An output would be like, hey, I wrote this document, right? And this big document went to the executive team, and that document was like really got me this project to be successful. That's an output. I don't care about the document. What I'm looking for is to say, hey, I did this, this, and this as part of my process. I wrote this big document. I used the document to get buy-in. That narrative is what helped me to get the resourcing I needed. But then based off of that, I then built X product. I scaled it in this way. I delivered these results as a result of it, right? So the outcome piece is not about all the things you produce along the way, right? It's more about how does the story you tell show the various points where you did have an output and how those laddered towards a total outcome, right? Trust and transparency is another one too, right? If I'm having an interview and I ask you a question about, when was the last time that you received critical feedback and took a direct action as a result of it? And people sit there and go, oh, well, I got some feedback that I talk too much. Like, okay, that's not super critical, right? A bit of a softball. So how does that compare to somebody who says, hey, I got some feedback that, the way I was, challenging somebody's idea was being destructive versus constructive. And instead of suggesting some alternatives, all I did was, point out where they were wrong. Next time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a structured piece of feedback using a framework called situation, behavior, impact, or SBI, right? So it's about really shaping the values or principles you hold up front and then asking questions to really suss out how well somebody aligns with those values or not, right? And we're still so early that, we, like, if you look on JOYA's website, it's not like I have all these values posted or something like that, right? But it is in our interview guides, and I'm starting with these job descriptions to actually include it in the job descriptions. And then rest assured, once we close this round, one of the things we as a collective team will do at the start of next year is we will actually codify those. We're going to sit down. We're actually going to work through a bottoms up exercise where we're going to bring all the different ideas from the team together. We're going to shape that into a set of shared values. And then we're going to use that in everything we do, in hiring, in performance reviews, in how we interact with each other, right? So again, it starts as implicit. And then over time, you look for ways to codify so it can become explicit. And then as it becomes explicit, you can weave the explicit values into everything you do. And I think that's one of the things I learned that is still super valuable to me from Amazon. Learned a lot from my time there. 5 years at Amazon from 2014 to 2019 was about 15 years worth of experience elsewhere. And, about the same amount of hours, 60 hour, 80-hour work weeks were typical. And so I learned a lot from that, but that's one of those big picture things that stuck with me that obviously I have to adjust and it scales back for these smaller companies, but Amazon does a very good job at that. Like, really, here's the culture. We've woven it into everything we do. And it was even some conversations where somebody would be like, well, there's two choices we can make here. One is more biased towards customer obsession, and one is more, biased towards our right a lot. And those are two of the Amazon, leadership principles. So it actually was so deeply ingrained in the culture that people actually use it as a heuristic to make decisions at times. So I think that's something they do well that any company of any size can model after. You just have to adjust it for your practices and align on what your values are, right? And make sure it's not too corporate and just like yucky, right? Because I think some of it's easy to put boilerplate, but I think where it has a lot of impact is when it's actually based on shared values and they're defined as a team, or as a company.
Yeah, I think especially at an early stage, it can be built quite
Yeah.
organically from everyone. And then even if you do set it in stone a little, it's like everyone did that together. Have you read
Yeah.
Tony Say's book? I think that's how you say his surname. It's called Delivering Happiness. It's
I have not.
he
Mm.
he had a company. He sadly passed away. He's really tragic. Also young,
Oh,
a bit like Jimi Hendrix. He
wow.
his I can't remember his company, but I think he sold it to Amazon actually.
Hmm.
Let me check him out. Yeah, his surname is Hseih. And I think you say his name Tony Zay. But yeah, he was CEO of a company called
He was
Zappos.
Zappos. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yes. I haven't read his book, but yeah, he was still around, I believe, and in my tenure there. I had a few friends who actually worked with him directly
Oh,
back in the
well,
day. Yeah, yeah.
apparently his culture piece is that's what it's all about. His book was
Yep.
called Delivering Happiness, and it was all about. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been a while since I read it, but the one thing that just jumped out to me when you were saying all of those really quite fascinating things that you were just saying is that and the interview process, that's it. He would pay them a sum of money, something like $1,000 to leave. Every single person would like be given this envelope when they first started the day. And yeah, obviously people who didn't fit with the culture were the kind of people who would say, no, no, I want to do this day.
Yeah,
of
yeah.
whatever the kind of day was that they had mapped out, and they had some long-winded day that did
Yeah.
exactly kind of what you're talking about,
Hmm.
tested them on the way that they would fit in with their company. Really
Hmm.
fascinating stuff. You should check it out. Delivering Happiness. I just remember it's
Yeah.
got a.
Thank you.
I'll send
Yeah,
you the link afterwards.
please.
So, oh, so many things we could talk about culture, but we'll end up going on all night for me, all day for you. So I think we should probably round this up a little bit. And I really do want to say a massive thank you to Ian. It's been so interesting. I know you've had such a long career of doing all these different things, and there's so many different things we talk about. But I loved hearing about how you've embedded culture and how you've taken different parts of culture, and it's something that everyone has in every business, and also everyone's experienced, unless they've never
Hmm.
been an employee. Everyone's experienced it as an employee, usually in not a good way, and
Yep.
so it's really great to hear the way that you've been implementing that. And I'm sure people can take that way. So I'm going to ask you one last question, which I,
Hmm.
I try to ask everybody, which is that if you could go back perhaps to yourself, maybe in Amazon 2016, or right at the beginning of your career, what would be the one piece of advice you would give yourself if you can only give just one?
Hmm. I think it's a tricky one. I'm sort of it's sort of the classic, had I not have done the things I did in the way I did, I don't know if I'd be where I am in my career at my age, bluntly, But I do think one of the things that I've really internalized and worked on the last few years of my career in particular is really starting to separate identity and worth from career, right? I think some of that was accelerated. I became a father. I have a kiddo who's turning 4 here soon. And I think some of that is, driven by the shift in, my worldview. And all of a sudden I'm a parent, going from not being a dad to a dad is a pretty big jump in a lot of ways. So I think some of that was accelerated. But I think early days, especially, I grew up in the time where we were told like these are the things you did and you will get the life you want, right? You go to school, you get your high school diploma, then you go to college, you get your degree, you meet the person that you're going to get married to, and then you get married out of college, and then you have 2 kids and a 2-car garage, and you'll have a house and everything will be great. Well, here we are, and none of that's working out, right? And so I think for me, had I have learned some of this and been able to separate myself from the work I did earlier, I think I would have been able to learn to enjoy more of my life earlier, right? And I think I made a lot of trade-offs as a younger person, like big time. I mean, even in college, I'd have friends going out and I'm going to my second job or going to class or whatever, right? Like there was a lot of sacrifice there. And when I look back on it, yes, you could argue that a lot of that sacrifice got me to where I am today, but at what cost, right? I think there was a chunk of my life that I over dedicated to career, to my job, to my success, right? And then, when you aren't able to separate your worth or your value as a person, from your job, all of a sudden the 60 to 80 hour work weeks are no big deal because this is just what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to grind and you're supposed to do all these things. So I think if I went back to do it again, it's not that I would work less hard. I think I would work just as hard, but I think I would have looked for more clever and creative ways to not make trade-offs on the other things that filled my cup, right? Like I could still go to that thing with my friends and I could still get the work done tomorrow, but maybe I can just do one thing less, right? Or maybe that one thing can get pushed out 3 days instead of having to do the extra 5 hour grind, right? So I think in summary, I would say, if I was to do it over again, I would teach myself sooner in life how to separate my worthiness or my value from my career trajectory. And I would have also said, as part of that, find a healthier balance between the things that bring you joy outside of your career and the things you're doing well in your career to get you the life that you want, right? So I think that's how I would probably frame it.
Mm, I love it. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to divorce that
Mm-hmm.
worthiness. And I don't know why really, but I guess it's just because everyone, we live in like a free market capitalist world, and
Yep.
so it's difficult not to be attached to that. But actually, yourself is yourself is nothing really to do with that, really.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
How
And look, we're not
interesting.
doing brain surgery, Hugo. I'll be honest, man. Like
Yeah.
I've been building apps, marketplace. Like it's all at the end of the day. If society went away, or if the world was ending, whatever, however catastrophic you want to make it, these things wouldn't really matter. Most of the software based products that I've worked on, these apps, whether it was at like Prime Video or I was at Amazon or I was in these marketplaces, even restaurant technology, right? Like these things are actually kind of made up, right? And it sounds a little crazy to say I'm in a career that's basically made up, but at the end of the day, it's not really tangible. And I think especially in tech as a sector, there's this sort of indoctrination of like you're supposed to grind, you're supposed to do all this, and you get paid highly, and you're supposed to earn that pay. But it's almost like run away from the industry where it's become this set of norms, and then now you look at mental health rates and you look at how folks are actually feeling in the tech sector, and you layer on the last 2 years of layoffs and AI everything and all this, like people are not doing well. I will just say, like, I have very few friends in tech right now that are doing okay, right? Everybody's strung out, everybody's feeling burnt out, everybody's exhausted. People are just like, why are we doing this? But we're also so stuck in what we're doing because of the pay and because it is kind of addicting. It's very hard, it's challenging, right? And if you like that, it's hard to walk away from. So I do hope that with the advent of AI and being able to automate more, that I hope there's a shift where instead of saying, "Oh, you've bought more time back with AI, now go just reallocate that
Do
same
double.
time to more work," right? Like I hope we break away from that pattern, and instead, what I hope we do is we say, "Hey, I found ways to automate, and I have time back for my life." So I pride myself now on most of my workflows being at least somewhat AI enabled, and in some cases, I've been completely automated my workflows. So my throughput is still a 50 to 60 hour a week employee, but I'm able to do it in 40 hours a week for the first time in 10 plus years, right? And like that is great because now I just bought back 10 to 20 hours a week that I go spend with my son, or I go hang out with my partner, or I see my homies, like so that to me is where we have this huge opportunity in this new era, which is how do we actually buy back some of our humanity and some space to be humans instead of this culture of like grind, 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 be more efficient, get more hours so you can work more hours. Like that's just yucky. And I think that's to your comment earlier is like we've built a complete societal structure around the capitalist mindset, which is work hard, get paid well. Well, we're finding that doesn't actually match. So how do we free ourselves from that and find ways to reinvest in ourselves, our family, our community, especially in this day and age? I think that's where the real stuff happens, right? Not these made up apps and whatever else, right? Which is at the end of the day, if the world ended, wouldn't matter, but your community would, right? If society
Mm.
collapsed tomorrow, the people physically around you, your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones, those are the people that would matter. They're the ones who would show up, not that app that you worked on, not your boss who made you work those 80 hours a week, right? So anyway.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting because I had a conversation with someone the other day, and it's actually something that Gary Vaynerchuk had said, but he was talking about
Mm-hmm.
uh, the move of a lot of businesses potentially going into the community more. So, for example, people just saying, and
Yeah,
not big businesses, really, really small micro businesses,
sure.
people saying, I'm not going to be, I don't know, like I'm not going to be an app developer, right? I'm going to go and I'm going to put an ad on Facebook and say, like, this was the exact example he gave. I thought it was so cool. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the X, Y, and Z area. I'm in Seattle, and I have a dog. And so, if you're a bit lonely or something like that, I'm happy to go for a walk. I can bring the dog. We could just chat for an hour, and that's it. And you stack those up with a bunch of people, and it's like a kind of
Yeah,
community friendship service. I thought
yeah,
that's cool.
love that. Yeah, love that.
But we'll see what happens when AI really, really does crack into everything. Well, listen, Ian,
Yep.
where can people find out more about maybe yourself? Where can they find you online?
Yeah.
Joya, of course.
Yeah, so check out JOYA Health. That's JOYA health.com. And that's where you can learn more about the company that we're working on building here and the products that we offer. And then as far as connecting with me, I invite your listeners to find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there, try to post on there, but that's a great place to reach me, learn more. And my door's always open. So if folks want to pick my brain, coffee chats, anything of the like, I've been doing this a long time. So if there's anything I can do to support others that are going through their journey, I'm always happy to. So I say, meet me at LinkedIn, maybe.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I certainly have enjoyed it. So thank you. And thank you so much. And people listening, pay the tax, the new tax, go and like and subscribe because no doubt you got something from there that you thought, oh, that's really interesting or that's fun or whatever. So yeah, give it a like, give it a subscribe, share it to one other person. I'd massively appreciate it. Ian, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Hugo, thanks for having me, man. Take care.
Take care.